Hi guys, it's Mrs. DeLoss. We're looking at Unit 1, Skill 1. These videos are going to look a little different. Our hands are going to be in them because we have to use something called a compass. And so hopefully your teacher has taught you how to use this, but just in case you haven't seen it, this here has some crosshairs on it. I'm not sure if you can see them in this lighting, but those little crosshairs are supposed to go on a point. Okay, so we call that the center, wherever that set of crosshairs is a center, and where you put your pen is called the radius. And so you can adjust the radius of your arcs by turning the dial, tightening, loosening, sliding, so on and so forth. Okay, so you might have a different style compass at home, and that's okay. We'll also teach you how to use that one, but if you're here and at school, we're using these kind. Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to construct a perpendicular bisector of a segment, and then for what additional constructions would we use that perpendicular bisector. So just to recap some vocab words for you, I'd like to go through these ones here. It says we've got perpendicular, and again that symbol for perpendicular is that upside down T. Perpendicular lines form, remember that symbol means congruent, so if you need to write that word in, congruent, which just of course means equal. So congruent right angles, and right angles of course are 90 degrees. Another vocab word that we've talked about once before is bisector. When we made the perpendicular bisector equation, a bisector means to cut in half, and we're cutting it in half at something called the midpoint, which is that exact point that divides a segment into two equal parts, exactly in the middle. Okay, so we're going to actually construct that here today. You've learned how to write the equation, but now we're going to do the construction. So it says construct the perpendicular bisector of CD and label the midpoint as M. So the first thing you're going to do is put your center on point C. Whenever you make a perpendicular bisector, you're going to need to make an arc that's over the halfway part of CD. Because if I only go less than halfway, then my two arcs that I make are not going to cross each other. So I want to open up my radius to about 3/4 of the way. It doesn't have to be exact, you just want to open it up big enough so that when we swing an arc above and below, and I switch to put my center on D, if you need to, turn your paper upside down. Remember to always, again, put your pen in the same hole. Okay, there's two different holes, you want to put it in the same one that you just used. So I used the front one. Now these two arcs cross over one another, and that's exactly what we wanted to happen to get these two intersection points. Sometimes we'll put labels on them like A and B or other letters, but I don't need to here. And then the last step I want to take is to connect them, and I'm going to connect through them. Okay, so I go beyond it, just a little bit above and below. And I'm going to cap it with arrows. That line that I just made is the perpendicular bisector. Okay, so maybe you want to draw yourself a little note here. This is the perpendicular bisector. And so what it's done for us is made congruent segments, so we need to label the midpoint as M, so I'm going to label that as M. So now we know CM, the segment, is congruent to DM, the segment. So these two parts, CM and DM, are congruent. I also know if I were to label these as, say, A and B, angle CMA is a right angle, because perpendicular lines make right angles. I could also say the same about AMD, right? This angle is a right angle. Or BMD, this angle is a right angle. There's 4 right angles formed by perpendicular bisectors. I'm just going to write one little note that the measure of angle CMA equals 90 degrees. So now we're going to take that construction and divide a segment into 4 congruent segments. So right now we've got 2 congruent segments. And truthfully what we should do to show that they are congruent is put, ooh, my pen's not working. I was so excited to use so many colors, it's not even working. Alright, put congruent marks on CM and DM. Okay, so example 2. Divide it into 4 congruent segments. So let's think about that for a second. If I have one segment called AB, I can, of course, divide it in half to get M. And then from there, I want to split each of those segments that are already congruent into two more congruent segments. Let's say C with D. Because now I have AC, which is congruent to CM, congruent to MD, congruent to DB. All four of those would then be congruent. So what we're going to do is make one perpendicular bisector to make M, then we'll make another perpendicular bisector to make C, and another one to make D. So 3 perpendicular bisectors in total. Okay, here we go. Remember, you start on the first one with your center. If you're using a compass at home, that would be the pointy part, not the pencil part. I have to open my radius to more than halfway, so again, if you're using a compass at home, you just stretch it out. And I'm going to swing this arc above and below, way above, way below. It's okay if it crosses over your other stuff from up above, not a big deal. I used the first hole, so when I switch and I put my center on B, I'm going to also again use the first hole. Okay, so if you are uncomfortable with how your arms are crossing, you can always again flip your paper upside down. Alright, so I've got 2 beautiful arcs that intersected, and now I'm going to make the first perpendicular bisector by connecting above and below. This will be our point M. So if I translate it back to here, now I have to make point C, which is exactly in the middle of A and M. So first I constructed the bisector of AB. Now I'm going to construct the bisector of AM and then of BM. Okay, so I'm going to choose a different color for this so it stands out. If you have different colors at home, that could be helpful. So center on A, but I don't want to have my radius way out here. I'm only focusing now on A to M. So I'm going to close this up a bit. You could go beyond this arc if you wanted to. It's totally up to you as long as you are more than halfway between A and M. So I can't go over here, that's too small. I've got to be more than halfway. So then I swing my arc above and below. I switch. Keep the radius exactly the same. It's important that you do that because otherwise you won't have an arc that's exactly in the middle. So from here, I'm going to connect straight through and call this point C. So far I've got these 2 segments that are congruent, but I need to do the same thing over here. BM is far too big right now, so we're going to cut that one in half using the same process. Now remember that BM is the same length as AM, so if I keep the radius exactly where it is, I should get the same size arc as before. Now you are welcome to adjust the radius as long as, again, you are more than halfway. So center on M to start to swing the arc. Now I've switched to have my center on B. I swing the arc and then connect. And this point here is now called D. So what am I noticing about these segments? Well, I know that from A to C, this piece is congruent to C to M, which is congruent to M to D, which is congruent to D to B. Okay, now you don't have to draw all those lines on there to finish the construction, but what I would suggest writing is that each of those segments are congruent. So AC is congruent to CM, which is congruent to MD, which is congruent to DB. And again, this bar means segment. So we've got segment AC, segment CM, segment, and a segment just connects 2 points. That's all it is. If you flip it over to the back side, you'll notice that it says summarize each step in the perpendicular bisector construction from example 1 and explain why each step is necessary. So we've typed the steps for you, but we're just going to review them real quick. It says place the center on point C and open the radius to more than halfway so that we end up with arcs that cross one another. Swing a smiley arc, that's what we like to call it. That's that arc that goes like this. Swing a smiley arc above and below CD, so it will end with 2 intersection points. So that's where we swing the 2 and we get that fish looking thing. From here we have to place the center on point, this should say D. I'm sorry, that was missing. And keep the same radius. Same radius, that's super important. So we find the midpoint and swing a smiley arc above and below, creating intersection points A and B. Connect through points A and B creating the perpendicular line with arrows, and the midpoint M where AB and CD intersect. So again, once we've connected, we had segment CD, this now becomes point M. To divide into 4 segments, cut in half, and then cut each half in half again. So again, 3 total perpendicular bisectors. Make sure that you do a little quick summary. Maybe you want to draw your own segment and make the perpendicular bisector of that. Whoop, whoop. Boom. Alright, have a good day, guys, and we will see you for practice.